Hi everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to my latest vlog. You'll notice there's a change in background here, and that's not because I've just changed locations within my personal space. I've geographically changed locations. I'm talking to you from Pakistan today, my country of birth, my country of origin, my home, where I'm here to visit my family for a few weeks. And this brings me into the topic of my vlog today, and that is the idea of identity and belonging. A number of people have asked me how I reconcile my life as being a woman from the global south or the majority world and work with global north or minority world partners and also live there. Because as you know, I now live in Canada. And that's something that has plagued me for a very long time, actually, since I moved to Canada as an immigrant many, many years ago. And I know many others have spoken about this constant tussle and tug of war of trying to define where exactly that they belong based on a number of variables. So there's your national identity, there's your birth identity, there's your gender identity, and then there's also a conceptual identity of where you think you belong in terms of the work that you want to do or your outlook on life. And that's all a very, very complex process. So, Pakistan is a country which sends a number of people overseas to different parts of the world to work, but a number of people also immigrate there permanently. I'm one of them, although I've been a recent migrant. For the longest time of my life, Pakistan was the only country I ever knew. I migrated to Canada very late in life. And so my perceptions of belonging and identity had already been fully formed by the time I moved. But having said that, my education and my exposure was very, very Western because I had had an English education. I had been to Canada to study as well as the UK, so I had foreign degrees. But I always came back to Pakistan. I was always as an international student on a student visa. And I always came back to Pakistan, and this is where I established my career. This is where the 25 years that I talked to you about of my career was spent here. The highs, the lows, the disappointments, the successes, the failures, they were all here. And that's what shaped me. My identity as a Pakistani woman is also very much embedded in me because this is the only country that by and large I've ever really known. And I've been brought up and grown up according to the norms and cultural values of this country. However, I'm still far removed because I am part of the elite of this country. And that term elite has changed drastically over the decades since I was born as well. Now I'm probably not part of the elite that you think. There is an elite much higher above my pay grade that exists in this country. So we've sort of, the middle class has been bammed down a lot, and there's a lot of discussion and debate by economists and sociologists about, who the middle class really is and where do we belong. So there are all these different discussions and debate. But situating my work has been a tussle since I moved to the West. That I 100% agree. And there have been a lot of contradictions that I've had to grapple with. Earlier, when I lived here, I was also grappling with contradictions. That's because as a Pakistani, I was working with foreign organizations here. I was working with the UN, with the World Bank, with INGOs, and that's because that's what my profession demanded of me. And I worked in that part of the sector where I was catering to primarily the donors and the INGOs, not necessarily only my people. So that itself was the very first contradiction that I felt, and at that point I was through and through only a Pakistani. It was the only identity that I had. And so that was a very odd time of my life, but I never challenged it or I never second guessed it because I was still a Pakistani, through and through, born and bred. And this was the only country I had. When I moved, things changed because now I didn't have one, but I had two countries, and that's what a lot of us migrants, or transnationals as we're now called, grapple with. But what did that mean for the work that I did in the development sector and the humanitarian sector? That is what people question me about, and I think that is a very, very tough idea and concept to deal with and try to get my head around it. So I still move between the two countries, and I always will because my family is here. And this is where my familial roots are. But my personal life, I guess, or where I eventually want to live, is overseas. And you'll hear background noise in this video because my mother just turned on the TV, and I'm not going to interrupt my train of thought by asking her to turn the volume down. So I'm sorry, but bear with me. So when I moved to Canada and started working in the development profession, I saw a very different side of it. I entered it as a woman from the global south who had worked in this profession and who at least thought that she understood her own people and the trials and tribulations of development in a developing country. That's not the response I got here. The response I got here was a very typically global north response that said, no, we are the ones who know exactly what to do in your country, and you will just go around and do it the way we tell you to. So your knowledge and your expertise and your language skills really don't matter to us over here because that's not how we work. And that was a rude shock for me to grapple with, well, who am I here? I understand I want to become a Canadian, but does that mean that I leave all my decades of experience in this profession behind? Do I leave it at the door? And do I completely transform myself into a global north person, thinking the way they do? That was very difficult for me to do, and I grappled for many years as I lived in Canada trying to get my identity straight. I mean, who the hell am I, right? But I was very sure where I wanted to live and what I wanted to do. This is the work at that point I wanted to do. I wanted to do it differently, which I'm fortunate enough to be able to do now. That is where I wanted to live. But my personal life always brings me back to Pakistan. And when I come back to Pakistan, I'm faced with Pakistan. I'm faced with its problems, I'm faced with its successes, I'm faced with its failures, I'm faced with its trials and tribulations. I go out onto the street, I live my life as a Pakistani every day, and I face the issues that women face here, I face the issues that even middle class elites like me face here, and I look at those who are less fortunate than me and I want to pull my hair out by saying, you know, the development sector who claims that they've done so much for poverty and the poor really doesn't even know what the poverty and the poor look like. And then I look at myself, I said, yes, but I ran away. I went away. I mean, I wouldn't say I ran away. I'm still straddling between two countries. But where do I really belong? And where does my allegiance lie? And I'm not talking about country-wise. One can have allegiance to two countries, but professionally, where does my allegiance really lie? Considering that I still collaborate or communicate with a number of global north organizations, because that's the majority of the sector. And I'm also seen by the global south as a traitor in many cases because I ran away, right? I'll give you an example. I went to Nepal. When I arrived in Canada as an immigrant, the first job I got was in an evaluation agency, and they were conducting a global evaluation for UN Women of one of their programs. Nepal was one of the countries that was part of the evaluation, and so I was sent off, and I was very fortunate. I had just landed there. I was just a contract person on the job, but they said, no, you're going to Nepal. I said, okay, perfect. Nepal is South Asia. I've been to Nepal before. I can't claim to know the people very well, but I can relate. Went to Nepal. And every Nepali I went to speak to, I was obviously introduced as this is the evaluator from, Canada. But I tried to say I'm actually a Pakistani and I'm a South Asian, and I completely understand and relate. You don't have to explain the situation to me in terms of, how the government works or how the civil society works. I completely understand because this is exactly how Pakistan works. But I was never seen as a Pakistani. I was seen as the Pakistani who had a Canadian permanent resident card. And I was representing Canada. And that was the first time that it hit me that I'm not being seen as the person I was born as. I'm being seen as a person I'm still not yet. I had a long way to go yet. But because I'm coming from Canada, that's how everybody views me. And here I was trying to be as Pakistani as possible because I thought I would be able to blend in and relate more. But that's not the case, and that was an extremely rude shock for me. Not to mention the fact that a number of people were quite envious of the fact that as a Pakistani I had managed to get to Canada and had a permanent residence. If only if I could tell them the story of how painful that process was, but that's a story for another day. But this sector looks at you in so many different ways. Even in our book, White Saviorism and International Development, a number of chapters brought up the issue of identity, of how brown or black people are viewed in their origin countries if they come from a non-white country as a representative of that country. That was my only experience as a representative of so-called representative of Canada. I've never had that opportunity again. I've always been a Pakistani in Pakistan. I've been a Pakistani Canadian in Canada. That's the other problem. There is the accusation that you'll never really be Canadian, because you're brown. And you came here really late. You weren't even born here. So you're grappling with that sense of identity. But then you're saying, okay, but I've been working in the development sector for like donkey's years. And you're not even going to sort of accept my experiences? So it is, to all those who ask what I grapple with in terms of identity, it's not easy. I want to be the Global South person because that is who I am, not just by birth or race, but that is who I am. But at the same time, I want also for the Global North to represent some of my thoughts and beliefs. Because there is things in life there and lifestyle that I cannot live here, that I can live there, things that I value about the Global North. For instance, the freedom that I can have as a woman there, which I don't have here in Pakistan. And so it is a toss-up. Eventually, where will I land? I don't know. I'm now in my 50s. I'm beyond that time where, I have to fashion out an identity. I am who I am. But I think my soul belongs in the Global South only because, I lived here for the first 40 years of my life since I was born. I'm writing a book on it right now as well. And so that will always remain with me. But whether I give it all up or whether I completely hold on to it is an individual choice. I think there can be a balance. Even in the work that we do as global development professionals, there is a balance, and that balance comes from the choice that we make. Some people want to radically go and say we just do not want to let go of our original identity, and they'll wear it on their sleeve, and that's their call. But then that's where the contradiction comes in of living in the Global North and believing in that way. But then there are some who say that we will completely give up our birth identity, who we are, and we will completely assimilate into our adopted home, including being a development worker that represents that home, even though that isn't our birth country, but it's our adopted home. And that is one way of doing it. I would like to think that there is a way that the two can meet together, that we can say that we do have roots and ties to the Global South, and that there are some things about it that will always remain with us, but there are some things about it that we've outgrown. And that our new adopted home will allow us the opportunity to develop an identity that we may want to adopt, because it suits some of us. That doesn't mean we completely forget where we came from, but it also means we're not going to hold on to that identity for dear life. And I think that balance is what will also help us bridge this gap into the development sector between, North and South. It's an artificial gap, we know that. It's primarily Global North originated, but that's where people like myself get also caught in this conundrum. We want to be in both places, we want to take the best of both worlds, but somehow we're pulled apart. Because we're always accused of saying, well, you left the Global South, you left your country and you ran away and you came here and now you're enjoying your life here. And so you have no right to say anything about your country. I think to a certain extent that is accurate. I don't know if I fall into that category. But this idea of who we are and where we belong is more, I think, about our belief systems than it is about a geographical identity or a religious identity or even a gender identity. I think we just need to be sure about what it is. I believe that the aid system needs to be changed, and I believe that that change should come from the South. That's where the power should now lie, or should be transferred back to. And I think where I am now currently living, the global North, needs to back out or back down, regardless of the fact that I'm living there. I think if one accepts that as a belief, it will make life much easier. Thank you very much. Until next time.